Hi, I'm Bill Glahn of the Center of the American Experiment, here with Bill Walsh for the Bill and Bill Show, our annual look back at the legislative session that just ended at the state capitol.
Second annual.
This is the second annual episode of this podcast covering activity at the state legislature. We're glad to report there wasn't so much this year, but we still have a lot to talk about. And Bill Walsh is the author of the Center's weekly feature, Capitol Watch, where he covers the goings-on at the state capitol, the state legislature, the executive branch, everything that's going on in state government. So the session for the year just ended at midnight last night, or 12:01 a.m. last night. What happened? What didn't happen?
Well, that's a huge question, and I'm actually I can say to all the folks that follow Capitol Watch, we're doing this podcast instead of me writing the Capitol Watch, and so this is Capitol Watch video version, and then when we're done, I got to go write the actual Capitol Watch. I mean, what happened is a good question. Like, what happened last night? Maybe we should start there. So last night was Sunday night, May 19th. The session had to finish their business voting by midnight Sunday night. They're actually in session today on Monday as we film this, but they're just doing speeches for people that are retiring. They can't pass a bill per the Constitution. So the deadline for session was midnight last night.
And in fact, wasn't the state Senate voting on a bill when the clock struck midnight?
Yeah, actually they were. They were trying to pass.
And the bill failed because they didn't get the vote done by 12:00.
Credit to Senate President Bobby Joe Champion, who called the vote and then called it and gavelled it in and said, the bill is agreed to, its title agreed to, and then the Republicans objected and say, Mr. President, it's after midnight. And he said, you're right, it's after midnight, that bill didn't pass. And so that was the last bill passing at the last minute. So, I mean, what happened? I mean, so much to unpack, but essentially they were heading toward a finish in the legislative session many years. Lots of stuff gets left to the end. Negotiations need deadlines, so the deadline is the last day of session. But we're going to go through a lot of this. But essentially what happened last night at the end of session is they had several large omnibus spending bills outstanding. HHS bill, a bill on transportation and government. They'd combined some things, but then they decided, all right, we're out of time. We're going to put it all into the tax bill, which was working its way through the process. And so they put all of these bills, like 7 or 8 things, including gun control legislation, and we could go through the list. Actually, I don't have the list in front of me, into one bill in the tax conference committee. Which point one senator, Republican senator, says this is the worst outcome I've ever seen. Bill Weber has been there about 16 years and said this is the worst legislation I've ever seen in the tax conference committee, and then sent that to the House and Senate for passage. Now it's 2,800 page bill because you've got nine or 10 bills in one bill, 2,800 pages. It never really got put together, I think, from the reviser's perspective, from the lawyers that write these bills. It never was put online. There was no printout of it so that legislators could read it, of course. So it was just sent to the House and the Senate to pass. And both the House and the Senate, in a kind of a crappy process, just overruled anything going on the floor. Republicans asking to debate the bill, offering objections through the rules, just ignored all that and said, the bill is up. And then they ignored the shouting from the Republican side. Hey, let's read it. Let's wait. Let's do this procedural thing. Ignored all that. Voting board is open. Everybody vote. Okay, the Republicans are still shouting. Chaos. Okay, the board is closed. The bill passes, and so the bill passed the House and the Senate in very similar ways in the last minutes.
You say the bill passed, but I think this is worth pausing on. There was no bill. They say it was 2,800 pages, or maybe it was only 1,400 pages. We don't know how long the bill is because there wasn't a paper copy of it available. They clicked on the website. The website was down for a while.
The website crashed.
Or it showed file not found. So there wasn't a PDF or a computer file. There wasn't a paper copy of the bill. Forget passed out to members. In existence anywhere. And they voted this thing through. It's the old Nancy Pelosi. We have to pass the bill to find out what's in it. So
yes,
we're going to talk a lot about what was in the bill or what wasn't in the bill, what passed, what didn't pass. We don't actually know for sure because they're still writing it.
Well, I hope not. Maybe I'm being naive. I hope they're not still writing it. And what the speaker would say, and she said it in a press conference, was that, well, look, we just combined a bunch of pieces into one bill. All those separate pieces went through committee, had plenty of debate, were allowed to be amended. which actually is not quite true. Some
Yeah,
of those
we know
pieces
that's
didn't
actually
quite
not
make
true.
it
We're going to
through.
talk about one of those big pieces later.
But this is her account of it. It's like, look, it wasn't like we sprung it on them at the last second and there'd been no debate or they didn't see it. They knew what was in these bills. But what that says is you got to trust me that I only put that in those bills because you can't verify, you can't read it. And Senator Johnson, the Republican leader in the Senate, they asked him that. He said, "Well, I don't trust him." There is a lack of trust, and we can kind of get into that. Maybe it's a good time maybe a good segue to get into kind of what led us here. Because in my opinion, they were headed towards a pretty mellow close to the session. They should have been in better control. Everything was going fine. They're probably going to pass a bonding bill, some other things we're going to talk about later. And then April 22nd happened. April 22nd is when Senator Nicole Mitchell traveled to Detroit Lakes, broke into her stepmother's house, and was charged and arrested with burglary. And then that's what happened. But more importantly, when the dust settled on her arrest and she came back to the Senate, the signal was sent, the votes were taken, we're going to let her keep voting. The decision was made by the Democrat senators. We're going to let Senator Mitchell, who has been charged with a felony burglary, to keep voting while the judicial process happens on her crime. And that changed the entire session. The session absolutely changed at that moment. Republicans had no longer had any trust for the Democrats, and all cooperation went out the window as long as she was voting with that felony hanging over her head, kind of tainting any legislation that could come from it. Senate Republicans and even House Republicans lost all lost all, desirability to work with these guys. And that changed the session.
Let me pause and recap what happened that fateful night in April, because a lot of this hasn't really gotten out. The state senator from Woodbury, she drove in the middle of the night. She left her home at 1 a.m. on a Monday morning. She drove straight 3 hours from Woodbury to Detroit Lakes to the home that her stepmother of 45 years shared with her father, who had passed on a couple of years ago. She broke in through a basement window. She has admitted this. She broke in through a basement window shortly after 4 a.m. on what she claimed was a welfare check of her stepmother. She wanted to check on the welfare, the health status of her. So driving in the middle of the night, no phone call to say, hey, I'm on my way. No, she claims she has a key to the house, but instead of knocking on the door, ringing the doorbell, using her key to open the front door, she broke in through a basement window, dressed all in black, and was supposed to be doing this welfare check. She woke up her stepmother because she, the state senator, was laying on the floor, dressed all in black, and the stepmom woke up, tripped over her, laying on the floor. The state senator ran into the basement and hid. The stepmom called 911, reported an intruder, described the intruder as a male because she never got a look at the intruder.
Wait, so she misgendered her stepdaughter?
It's she didn't know who she was. It was just, hey, stepmom, hey, mom, I'm here to check on you. No communication. She ran into the basement. The the local cops came, found the state senator in the basement, arrested her, charged her with a felony burglary charge. Burglary is considered a violent crime in Minnesota. She was charged with a felony charge. A local media interviewed the stepmom. The stepmom says, I believe the senator was there to do me harm. And this, they're allowing to cast the 34th and deciding vote on all this controversial legislation the last month.
Yeah, and an ethics complaint was filed against her, and they had an ethics committee hearing, initial hearing, and the defense was, look, let's let the criminal process play out. She has a hearing in court on June 12th. I think that's very reasonable for the ethics process to wait for the criminal process to play out, as long as she doesn't continue to vote on the Senate floor. So that's the problem. Is that you absolutely will wait until see what happens in court, but in the meantime, you don't vote. You don't vote. You don't continue to. Anybody else in a job, like police officers, for instance, when there is an incident on the job, perhaps they use their firearm in the process, they immediately hand in their badge, hand in their gun, administrative leave until this is all sorted out. They don't continue to do their job because there are questions that have been raised.
Right. So she's voted on bill after bill after bill that has passed. A lot of it's already been signed by the governor, or will be signed by the governor in the next few days. That's going to become law. That will become law. Those dollars will go out the door. Those laws will be enforced by criminal law enforcement or civil judges or whatever. It's going to be in the statute books here shortly, and there's no do-over. If she's convicted of a felony downrange next year, the year after, whenever her trial comes up, none of that legislation is going to be taken off the books. There's no do-over. So all she had to do was sit out for a few weeks. They could have always come in with a special session. Democrats control every bit of government. The governor could have called a special session. If she was exonerated or they made a deal with the Republicans, they could come back and pass whatever needed to be passed after the fact.
See, but there's so much to talk about, and we're going to run out of time. This brings up a couple different things. One, it's the 34-33 majority that's what's stressing them all out. She has to vote in order for them to pass anything because they need her 34th vote. Or they could have worked with Republicans and got some stuff done in a bipartisan way. The Republicans would have given, but they chose not to do that. They went the partisan route. Just as a side note, you've got already Senator Kerry Dietzig, who is recovering and fighting cancer, not showing up for any of this. And so she continues to vote remotely, like phoning in her vote, or they call her, I don't know how they're doing it, but they announce her vote from the floor of the Senate through a phone call while she hasn't been on session all session, essentially. She hasn't been there. And the constitutionality of that needs to be challenged. I don't know if anybody will. Maybe Upper Midwest Law Center will take it on at some point. But the idea that you can not be at session for the entire thing, on the flurry of activity at the end of the day, all the motions and all the rules things, she just continued to vote, oddly, with the majority leader every time. I mean, she never made her own decision about what was happening in the moment, in the room. Well, because she wasn't in the room, of course. So it's absurd that she kept voting from afar. And then brings us to the other segue. The other major reason it all fell apart was on Saturday. Again, I used to call it majority leader for the day. When you have a one-vote majority, then any one member of that 34 can decide, I'm majority leader today. I will not vote for anything that comes up on the agenda unless I get my way. I am the de facto majority leader. State Senator Omar Fattah woke up on Saturday morning and decided he was going to be majority leader for the day. And he held up in his office, would not come to the floor, would not vote for any bills on the Senate floor to keep the things moving until he got an Uber Lyft deal that he wanted in the way that he wanted. And so everything ground to a halt, and all the leadership had to go cater to Senator Fattah, and they actually worked out an Uber Lyft agreement. Congratulations. They spent 13 hours of daylight on the Senate floor. Not a single vote was taken. Nothing was done. They were in recess for 13 hours. And then they have the audacity to complain about Republican obstructionism in the last few days of the session. And then I don't even think we have time on this podcast to go through the deal that they cut with Uber and Lyft. Right. It's outrageous. There's a couple of highlights. We're setting a minimum wage for Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. We're setting a minimum mileage they can get money from. They forced up some other benefits on the company to they have to give to these drivers. And here's the problem. Not the problem. So the Democrats did finally get a deal on Uber and Lyft. And then Saturday night's news was, a deal has been reached on Uber and Lyft. All the news stations covered it. They had a big press conference. They called it a press conference. They dragged the press to this press room in the Capitol. The governor was there. This is another sector we'll get to next. The governor's complete lack of leadership. He must have been leading on this piece. He's at the press conference. They're patting Omar Fattah on the back. Oh, he's the greatest guy in the world. We got this done. He's standing up for drivers and wages and everything else, helping his people in Minneapolis, the whole bit. And it's a rah-rah press conference. Rah-rah, oh, aren't we great? It reminded me of last year when every time they did something, I called it the selfie session. Look at us. We did this with your money. And so that little bit of a return to that in that press conference.
They carried him off the field on his shoulders, the senator. State senators carried off the field on the shoulders of the Uber and Lyft drivers that he had gotten the 20% raise, which is going to translate into a 20% increase in fares, of course.
By the way, your next ride to the airport is going to be more expensive. But anyway, at the end of this rah-rah press conference, they didn't take questions from the press. Right. Like, hey, where's the bonding bill? Where's all the major legislation that's supposed to pass? And so it's as if the Democrats said, and they actually led with it in their press conference after session, we got this Uber Lyft thing done.
This was a problem that was completely created by the Democrat socialists who control the Minneapolis City Council. So self-described socialists control the Minneapolis City Council. They passed this ridiculously large minimum wage increase for rideshare drivers that caused the major rideshare companies to say, we're leaving the region, we're leaving the city, we're leaving the metro region. Then the Democrats of the state legislature, rather than working with Republicans to come up with a reasonable compromise, decided they were going to negotiate with themselves to come up with a bill that would apply statewide. And then Uber and Lyft said, we're going to pull out the whole state.
Yeah.
So they've created this problem themselves that kept snowballing until it was holding up the whole show, and then held up, as you're right, as a veteran of these things, the most expensive real estate in the Minnesota legislature is those last few hours of each year's session. And they blew the entire day of Saturday with this non-problem they created. We have $7 billion of construction projects waiting for a resolution.
Right.
That was supposed to be the big win this year.
Yep.
Going back to February 12th when the session started, the biggest goal was to pass the bonding bill, which is borrowing money to do construction on college campuses and water projects and the like. $7 billion of projects waiting to be funded. They never got to it. Didn't happen. This was supposed to be the bonding year because they had to solve this problem created by the socialists on the Minneapolis City Council that only affects a few dozen drivers in Minneapolis and, the Uber customers who use the service.
It's just amazing watching them. Like, this is their number one legislative accomplishment, when it was a non-problem a year and a half ago, when everyone was just getting their Uber to the airport, and it wasn't even a problem for most Minnesotans. All right. Other issue, where was Governor Walsh? Outside of this Uber Lyft thing, I did not see his name connected to any of the negotiations. I don't remember seeing people running in and outside of his office all day while we're negotiating the end of these sessions. Where was Governor Walsh? What the heck was he doing at the end of session?
Well, he was tweeting, that he, or more likely his social media intern, the whole weekend tweeting about Donald Trump's visit on Friday night, or the basketball game that was going on at the same time as the session. So he was tweeting about all kinds, or somebody on his behalf was tweeting. But you're right. You and I have been doing these for decades, and the governor is always involved, always available, blocks out time to negotiate, even if it's one-party rule, to negotiate the deal between warring members so they can get something passed and everybody can declare a win. Maybe he was watching the ball game on TV, or he was just not available this weekend.
And just completely not available. I mean, Mark Dayton had some years where he was completely checked out,
But he was still there.
Yeah,
but he might have been ineffective, but he was there.
But man, and this was complete lack of leadership. I mean, he just wasn't present at all. All right, let's talk a little bit. We talked about obstruction, Republican obstructionism. The Democrats had a press conference and just right after the session said, "Why didn't you get done?" Well, Republicans obstructed. The Speaker of the House, I think I wrote it down, she said it was extraordinary and out of proportion, and I'm thinking, no, Madam Speaker, it wasn't extraordinary. It was quite ordinary. At the end of a session, the minority is gonna slow things down. They're gonna try to run out the clock. It is done my first session was 1995 when I worked for Steve Swickham. This happened every single session since then. When you get to the end, the other side's gonna take time. And I used to be in the majority when I worked over there sometimes. So you'd be like, all right, we got to bring these bills to the floor. We have 6 bills left. We have 2 days. Well, how much HHS? That's going to take 6 hours. We used to predict that's going to be 6 hours on the floor because they're going to have amendments. They're going to slow it down. They're going to filibuster it, and then so you'd plan. Well, that's going to take 6. All right, run it at noon. We'll get done at 6. Then we'll have dinner break, and then we'll bring in the next one. That'll go to midnight. You planned it out. They completely forgot how to plan it out, or lost their memory that every session has been like this. It's outrageous. One more thing.
Before you get off of that, is basic project management.
It is.
It's you start at the end, you work your way back. You start at midnight on Sunday, and you work your way backwards. And you got a budget for how much time that very valuable real estate you have starting Friday, Thursday, Wednesday. You back up to start when you got to start to finish at midnight. There was none of that went on. They just figured, we'll throw everything into, it turned out to be the tax bill. We'll throw 10 bills into the tax bill. It won't exist, but we'll have a theory of what it'll look like, 2,800 pages of something. We'll get the votes passed, and then we'll figure it all out downrange. It's just basic incompetence.
And one thing they did this year that's not done in Minnesota, and you can argue around the country, other states do this. We don't. We've never done it. We don't end debate. We don't have a procedural vote to cut off debate. If you've got something to say, as long as you're within the topic, you can't be deleterious. You can't really filibuster, but you got to stay on topic. But we don't end debate. Well, they actually moved procedurally to end debate.
Calling the question.
Call the question.
If somebody called the question in past years, it's been done 2 or 3 times. It's a multi-week controversy ensues. And they were just doing it left and right Sunday.
Yeah, and they're saying, oh, we got to look at this. Maybe this is because the Republicans were so bad this year. They give them way too much credit. They weren't really that great at obstructing. They did a good job. They held it. They hung in there, but it wasn't extraordinary. One thing that Senator Murphy said, the majority leader, she said she was talking to the press about why things didn't get done. Well, the bonding bill came to us late. I thought, wait a minute. What do you mean the bonding bill came to us late? From who? Where did it come from? And Senator Murphy, you run the committees.
You gave it to yourself late.
The chair of the bonding committee works for you. He's your colleague. Where did it come from late? You didn't come out of nowhere.
Democrats are in complete control of state government. They control all of those back office operations that produce the bills, produce the reports, and
it's just absurd. So that's one of the points we want to make. And by the way, a lot of times when you're figuring this out at the end and you're the majority, and we've got 4 hours in the debate of this bill, you negotiate. You go to the other side and say, look, we don't have 6 hours to this bill. How can we work this out? And there's a negotiation. Well, you know what? If you take that piece out of that bill, our members will feel a lot better about it.
That would be bipartisan.
And then I'll guarantee you as leader, I'll tell them to sit down and we won't do a 12-hour debate on this bill because you've done this thing. That didn't happen, obviously. No negotiations at all. So don't believe the speaker when she says, oh, this is the worst obstruction she's ever seen. That's just a lie. She's been there a long time.
She couldn't manage the floor. She had one job to do and she couldn't do it and looking for somebody to blame.
Yep. All right. What things that didn't happen? The good news is because of this obstructionism by the Republicans, and honestly, they did do some good work as the minority always does. Some stuff didn't get across the finish line. And frankly, if you're a conservative, it was a really good day. Some really big things did not pass because of their incompetence and also the Republican work to keep them off the table.
Right.
So let's go through some of those.
So we're seeing a little bit of the opposite of what we just said. Yeah, 2,800-page bill passes the last second, didn't even exist. But there were very low expectations set for this session. They did so much last year, way too much last year. This year they were going to set sights low, reduce expectations. The bonding bill was supposed to be the big thing. They didn't even meet their low expectations.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been following since February 12th when they gavelled in was the sanctuary state bill. They were going to create Minnesota as yet another. There's about a dozen or so states in America that are sanctuary states for illegal aliens. They protect illegal aliens from being deported or being arrested. They had press conferences about this bill back in February. They had rallies at the Capitol about this bill back in February. They had lots of people writing op-eds in the media saying that Minnesota needs to get on the sanctuary state bandwagon. The Center of the American Experiment did a petition campaign. The bill never even got a hearing at the legislature, never even came up in committee, and it died earlier.
Yeah, our supporters sent 20,000 emails to the Capitol saying no sanctuary state. We also did 2 events on this, or 3 events on sanctuary state issue, which had lots of people come to, very interested in it. So
it died for this year.
Yep.
It might come up next year, but didn't get anywhere this year. So that was good news.
Yep. The ERA amendment was another one, a massive priority for the Democrats. And it started with the Equal Rights Amendment, as you kind of know it from other states trying to change the U.S. Constitution, for an Equal Rights Amendment, equality for women in the workplace and everywhere else. But the Democrats put a bunch of other stuff on it, abortion politics, gender politics, cramming all kinds of stuff into this thing is unreadable. If you read it, you don't even know what you're reading. Lots of explanations in this chapter, very clunky thing, but a huge priority for them. I kind of laugh at them. Lots of urgency to pass the ERA, except it won't be on the ballot until 2026. So they want to put this ERA amendment with abortion and gender politics on the ballot in 2026 because there's so much urgency to get this done. They couldn't possibly put it on the ballot this year because only the House of Representatives are on the ballot this year. In 2026, you've got the House and the Senate and the governor on the ballot. So this is a get out the vote tool for Democrats across the country. If there's an abortion amendment on the ballot, it drives turnout, and every one of them has been good for Democrats since the Dobbs decision in 2022. So I am very surprised and pleasantly surprised that the ERA amendment did not make it. Again, lack of leadership for Tim Walz. This had to be, from a political standpoint, high on his priority list to get this on the ballot in 2026 when he's planning. Guessing he's going to run for re-election. He hasn't announced that. He's going to run again. And the fact that it died I think it died because Senate Republicans were very strong and House Republicans very strong, telling the Democrats that if you put that ERA thing on the ballot, nothing else is going to happen. We're not doing a bonding bill. You're going to lose even all cooperation for that. I think that was the message that was sent, and they succeeded in keeping that off the ballot. So I know conservatives, we love to beat up on the legislature, the Republicans of the legislature. They always disappoint us, at the end of every session. This is a session where conservatives should be very happy with the Republican leadership at the Capitol, because they really did stick together, for one thing, and then fight and keep some very bad things off of the ticket.
There were a lot of things that assumed to be in the mix and were just going to happen and didn't happen, and Republicans were fighting every inch of the way.
So bonding didn't happen, ERA didn't happen, sanctuary state didn't happen. What else?
Well, a couple of things that are my personal things that I follow that may not be super important for everybody, but ranked choice voting, which is very anti-small d Democratic. It does the opposite of what all of its advocates say it's going to do. And they've been trying to spread ranked choice voting through municipal elections, local elections, and there was a bill that had a lot of support that was going to spread it through local elections statewide. And it actually came up for a vote in the House yesterday and couldn't pass the House. There were 3 Democrats who voted against it. So they couldn't even get all of their own members on board with this. And so it's something I follow. It's a bad idea. It's been a disaster wherever it's been tried, but it's got a lot of well-funded. There's a Texas billionaire who loves this idea and has been funding this idea in states other than Texas that he doesn't live in. And it was, with all the money behind it, with all the political support behind it, they couldn't even get Democrats to vote for it.
Yeah, and just as an aside, we were talking earlier about Republican obstructionism. I mean, if you're the Speaker of the House and you bring a bill up on the floor on the last day when time is of the essence, when time is so valuable, that doesn't have 68 votes, and you can't count, you don't even know whether the bill's going to pass, and you're going to blame Republican obstructionism, it's complete bunk. They were just wasting time waiting for the Senate or waiting for negotiations to happen and brought that bill up and said, let's see how it goes. There was no obstruction happening to that.
Just a couple other things that I've been following this session. There was a universal basic income proposals, just pay people for existing, and they were going to create a pilot project. City of St. Paul did that. I think they used COVID money or something like that, just to write people a check for $500 every month. This idea has been tried, and the idea is we're just going to give you money for low-income people, no questions asked. It didn't get anywhere this session. Solar power subsidies, the Public Utilities Commission of all entities has been trying to rein in some of these rooftop solar, community solar projects because they're horrifically expensive and
raising
rates way out of proportion to the amount of energy they're producing. And Democrats were going to go reinstate some of these subsidies at the Public Utilities Commission, which again is controlled all by Democrats, struck down. They floated this idea the last minute. It died. So there was a lot of bad ideas that didn't happen this year.
One more. That is the gambling. The sports betting did not happen. And whether you're for or against sports betting, I don't think it's a good idea. But you could be a libertarian and certainly say if you want to gamble on sports, go ahead. Everyone else in the country is doing it. But the Minnesota deal, I'm almost sure, would have been the Native American tribes again get a monopoly on sports betting. That's the way they were headed. And again, we have the worst compacts in the country for gambling for our Native American tribes. They're in perpetuity. They're never to be revisited. There's no tax revenue that comes out of it. They get all of the income. All of the gambling is done for Native Americans. And now you're going to add sports betting where you have a chance to say, all right, maybe the racetracks could get some revenue from this. Maybe the bar down the street, maybe charities could get some money from sports betting. They were going to restrict it to just Native Americans again, which I think is a terrible idea. So gambling died. It did not pass. It'll have to come back and we'll be back. Trust me, the sports betting will be back. And maybe they can cut a deal where it's more agnostic in terms of who winners and losers are. I mean, if you just want to make sports gambling legal, then there ought to be a way to do it where other entities can get involved. So
I do have one thing that did pass, but I want to mention it as we told you so. Mm-hmm. So there's this horrifically bad program they passed last year called paid family leave, where we're creating a new entitlement, a new government agency to administer this new entitlement. It'll cost billions of dollars, for state government to pay people, again, for paid family leave, sick time, that sort of thing. We said, not just me, but some of our colleagues down the hallway here, literally down the hallway here, talked about how they've been kidding themselves that this payroll tax that they put in place is going to even begin to cover the cost of this. And so they had to, well, this thing won't even start until next year, the year after. They had to pass a payroll tax increase this year because they're so far behind on just paying the startup costs of it. We told you so. We told you this is going to be horrifically expensive. They tried to lowball it. They've already passed a tax increase for a benefit that hasn't started yet because actuarially they're not even close to the cost of this program.
Yeah. Taxes upon taxes. Okay, last topic, and then we're going to close this podcast up. I call it the myth of clean government in Minnesota. We like to believe as Minnesotans that we're the best. Everyone's above average, right? Garrison Keillor and whatnot. And that we have clean government in Minnesota. Oh, everything's so on the up and up and on the above board, and we really don't. We really don't compared to other states. Many states have made a lot more progress on getting their politics in order than we do. So I don't have a lot of data on this. Just to say, I was just thinking about it as I watched again another crashing session where rules are broken and all this stuff is happening. But just this idea that this myth that we have clean, upstanding government in Minnesota. It's a great place to, we're a civic-minded state. We have the highest voting,
good government. We're a good government.
Highest
state.
Voting levels in the country. But we have a terrible campaign finance system where a lot of the money that you have to report gets reported after the election. There's all kinds of changes we could make to make our campaign finance system better. Who's paying for these legislators to do these things? And also just the legislators committing crimes and voting under felony arrest. Things like that. We are not that clean.
Well, I mentioned to you that institutions develop reputations, and if they're deserved, they can persist for decades after whatever gave rise to that reputation is gone. Columbia University of New York is a great example. One of the Ivy League universities, considered one of the elite higher education institutions on planet Earth, have completely thrown it away in the last few years, going back to a cheating scandal where they were trying to rig the rankings of U.S. News, to this latest debacle with the anti-Israel protesters, and their reputations in tatters. And the same thing with MIT and Harvard over some of their having to plagiarizing scandals and some of the other stuff that they've encountered. But we've had this good government reputation, and maybe it was deserved back in the 60s and 70s, but we've really fallen behind on the transparency. A lot of states you would consider backwards compared to Minnesota are much more transparent, much more above board on the way laws are made and campaigns are financed, et cetera, et cetera. But, it's one of these gradually, then suddenly. So we've chipped away at the reputation of Minnesota, and I think we're at the point of collapse. And I think last night, shenanigans, jamming these bills through that didn't exist. We still don't know what's in the bills, and we're just hoping for the best. That Minnesota has put to a lie the idea that we're clean, non-corrupt, above board, and I think we're all going to suffer for that no longer being true.
Yep. All right. Well, this has been our first look. We did the same thing last year. First look at the session. Just our first thoughts as we come out of the gate. We're going to plan to do this in more depth on a webinar, I think of a week from Friday. So if you're watching this at what point, it'll be Friday, May 31st. We're probably going to have a webinar, a live webinar. If you're watching this after from Friday, May 31st, you missed it. But
you can still watch.
Well, you'll probably go back and find it on the website and watch it. But this has been our first look. So
and Bill Walsh, thanks for doing this, and I look forward to reading the last Capitol Watch of the season.
I'll go write it right now. Thanks.